Brother Jake will address the topic Secularism and Liberalism Unmasked. He will help us get a better understanding of what secularism and liberalism are, explaining some of the concepts and principles, and promoting the Islamic alternative, inshallah. Brother Jake, aka the Muslim Metaphysician, he often debates atheists, Christians, he deconstructs their narratives, and he presents Islam as a solution. He has his own YouTube channel titled or called Adventure Podcast. He has worked on multiple courses on Christianity that has helped ICNA and Why Islam, as well as Sapience Institute. He has a bachelor's in criminal justice and another bachelor's in philosophy, and is currently working on his master's in philosophy and theology. Brother Jake, the podium is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, it's been a long day for some people who've been here all day, but hopefully you guys are still awake and will be able to listen to this talk. I do apologize, some of the material is dense, but it's a little bit of a difficult topic. So I pray that you guys will at least benefit something from the talk. So the talk is Secularism and Liberalism Unveiled. First, we need to understand what secularism and liberalism are, and not just from a Muslim perspective. So I'm going to be reading from their sources. What do they say? Let them speak for themselves, and then I'll explain the Islamic narrative and why they're diametrically opposed, and why not only they're opposed, but it's so dangerous, especially for the youth. So, what is secularism? Secularism is a term that was coined in 1850. So, relatively speaking, it's somewhat new, but 1850, to denote a system which is sought to order and interpret life on principles taken solely from this world. So, without referencing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or belief in God or a future life, the akhirah. It is now sometimes used in a more general sense to refer to the tendency to ignore, if not deny, the principles of religion. And that's a reference from Oxford. Maybe if we have a way for me to make the presentation available, I wish I would have been able to put it on the screen, but unfortunately I forgot the thing to connect my laptop. So if anybody's interested, I'll make this publicly available if you guys want the references. So it's also been defined in a book called English Secularism, and I quote, "Secularism is a code of duty pertaining to this life founded on considerations that are purely human and intended mainly for those who find theology indefinite or inadequate, unreliable, or unbelievable. Its essential principles are three." So what are the three core principles of secularism according to the secularists? Not according to Jake. I mean, I could tell you what I think about it, and I will throughout the talk, but this is from them. Just like in Islam, you know, we wish, although it doesn't happen most of the time, that the non-Muslims would actually come to the Muslims and ask what Islam teaches so they can get the correct message. We want to do the same even with those that we disagree with. So what are these three essential principles of secularism? The first is the improvement of this life by material means. These people are obsessed with money, fame, fortune. And I'll go into more detail about some of that, but that's the first key principle. Improvement of this life, focus on this life by material means. So they're very materialistic. Two, that science is the available providence of man. So science is the big thing. Whatever science says, even though it's changing every couple years or, every time you check out what the newest supposed scientific theory is, science is basically the arbiter of truth. And 3, that it is good to do good. Whether there be other good or not, the good of the present life is good, and it is good to seek that good. So it's a focus on the dunya. There's no reference to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the akhirah. Those are the fundamental 3 principles of secularism. Now, what about liberalism? And they're related, and I'll explain kind of how as we go along. But here's a quote. I mean, it's been defined differently by different people, but I like this quote from Isaiah Berlin. This is how he defines liberalism. And you can see, even before I get through it, how all of this is diametrically opposed to Islam and why it's so dangerous. So he says, I am normally said to be free to the degree to which no man or body of men interferes with my activity. Political liberty in this sense is simply the area within which a man can act unobstructed by others. If I am prevented by others from doing what I could otherwise do, I am to that degree unfree. And if this area is contracted by other men beyond a certain minimum, I can be described as being coerced, or it may be enslaved. So they think, if there's any what they would consider oppression or obstruction to what they want to freely do, it's all about the freedom of the individual, not about societal cohesion and what we have here. I mean, mashallah, we have a very beautiful audience, all different kind of people getting together, coming together for a common good, right? They don't care about that. Very individualistic. Just let me do whatever I want. As long as I'm not imposing on you, you can't have anything to say about it. This is their idea. So, and if they think if you are doing anything to obstruct from that in any way, right, they would consider it slavery. So coercion is not, however, a term that covers every form of inability. If I say that I am unable to jump more than 10 feet in the air or cannot read because I am blind, it would be eccentric to say that I am to that degree enslaved or coerced. Coercion implies the deliberate interference of other human beings within the area in which I could otherwise act. You lack political liberty, so notice liberalism comes from this idea of liberty, or freedom only if you are prevented from attaining a goal by human beings. So it's all about the goals of human beings and individuals having the freedom to do whatever they want, right? John Stuart Mill, who's a philosopher that some of you may have heard of, he wrote a famous book which is called On Liberty, and he's one of the pioneers, or seen as one of the pioneers of liberalism, especially modern liberalism. So he says, and I quote, individuality is the same thing with development, and it is only the cultivation of individuality which produces or can produce well-developed human beings. What more can be said of any condition of human affairs than that it brings human beings themselves nearer to the best thing they can be? Or what worse can be said of any obstruction to good than that it prevents this? So it's all, again, focused on individuality, right? That's why we see here in the U.S., which is a very liberal society in the way that I'm describing it classically speaking, especially with the non-Muslims, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and our families from this. The non-Muslim families in the West are so divided. Everything's about themselves. Look at all the older people in all of these old homes all over the country because their kids don't even want to take care of them. All right? This is not the Muslim way, but unfortunately this is the West that's been infected by this idea of liberalism and individualism, right? It's all about the individual, not about social cohesion. Now, where do these ideologies come from? Because if somebody asked me, where does Islam come from? We can explain it, right? So where do these ideologies come from? Well, as I mentioned earlier, secularism was introduced as a term in the 1850s. But actually, it was a term that was first used by a fellow by the name of George Jacob Holyoake. That's an interesting name, in 1846. And he developed the early stages of liberalism in the 1800s. And he actually had a debate with another famous liberal who's called Charles Bradlaugh. And in his farewell speech, so in the speech that he was giving, you know, his last and final speech, everybody's familiar with, I would hope so anyway, the last sermon of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, right? So what the Prophet's message was in that final sermon is obviously important to Muslims, right? So likewise, what was his farewell speech? He's going to tell you very clearly, this isn't just propaganda or, you know, Jake doesn't like liberalism and, you know, this is just Muslims. No, this is him speaking. This is his farewell speech. What does he want you to know about secularism? Because some people are thinking, well, Jake, we can live in the secular West. No problem. It's not going to cause us any issues, right? We have the Islamic Oasis Center and we could just stay in our community and no problem. But there are things we have to be concerned with. Why? Because they are pushing this in education, right? Which I'm going to get into in a little bit, through media and other means. But what does he say in his farewell speech? What does he want us to know? He says, one element of danger in Europe is the approach of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, don't get confused because these guys hate all religion. So it's not just about the church. You can replace church with mosque. It's the same idea. One element of danger in Europe is the approach of the Roman Catholic Church towards meddling in political life. Beware when the great church, whose power none can deny, the capacity of whose leading men is marked, tries to use the democracy as its weapon. There is danger to freedom of thought, to freedom of speech, to freedom of action. The great struggle in this country will not be between free thought and the Church of England, not between free thought and dissent, but as I have long taught and now repeat, between free thought and Rome. And for those who don't know, there are three main branches in Christianity, or you can say three main sects in Christianity. One are the Catholics, which I'm sure you have, you know, neighbors or maybe people you went to school with that are Catholic. You've heard of the Catholics. And they follow the Pope in Rome, and that's why sometimes, for short, they call them just Rome for short. So when he says, there won't be a problem basically between free thought and the Church of England, and the Church of England is a church that belongs to the Protestant sect. So if you heard of the evangelicals in the US, right? The Bible thumpers. They are Protestants. Church of England is a part of the Protestant movement, and in reality, secularism and liberalism is really birthed out of Protestantism, right? The Protestant Reformation, which happened in the 15s and 1600s. Now, why is that? Because what you'll see, if you haven't noticed already, is that secularism and liberalism is fundamentally focused on, as I said, individualism, and it's anti-authoritarian. They don't want an authority. They don't want God as an authority. They don't want Quran and Sunnah as authority. They want their own desires as authority. It's their desires, it's my body, my choice, all this business they talk, right? They don't want any authority above them. So why is he saying that, look, we don't have to worry about the Church of England, these Protestants, we have to worry about Rome. Why? Because even though we disagree, of course, with Catholicism, it's a false religion. I'm actually a former Catholic myself. Even though we disagree, what their problem is that the Pope is the head of the church. So he's an authority figure. And the Roman magisterium, all these different priests and popes. You don't really have that in Protestantism, right? It's just a guy in his room by himself with his Bible. He reads it, nobody bothers him. So you see how individualism within Protestantism is connected with this secular liberal movement. That's why a lot of the Catholics are mad at the Protestants, because they're saying, look, you brought into the West, when the Protestants broke off from the Catholic Church, you brought us in all this secular, liberal, atheistic garbage came along with it. And they're partially right about that. So I just want to be clear on why they didn't really fear Church of England, but they feared Rome, not because it's the haqq, not because it's true, but because they feared it as an authority. They don't want an authority over them, right? So as I said, secularism and liberalism are fundamentally anti-authority, all about human autonomy and free will, and they're very individualistic. Individual freedom and liberty are of the utmost importance. Now, what's the problem with these ideologies? Obviously, I've been speaking about already, so many of the problems are obvious to people listening. But again, let's hear it from them. Is it Jake that's just saying, well, you could be a Muslim and be secular or not? No, you can't. Secularism and liberalism are directly connected with atheism. Why? Because Islam is submission. Submission to the Creator. Submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our will is not superior to the Creator's will, right? We try to make our will in line with His will, not the other way around. For the secular liberalist, it's the exact opposite. They don't care about God. They don't care about what Scripture has to say. It's all about their own desires. That's why the Quran says, have you seen those who have made their own desire as a God besides Allah? That's what these people are doing. They don't want to follow and submit to the Creator. So again, this is not my, speculation. This is Charles Bradlaugh in the 1800s. He says, although at present, meaning at present moment at his time, it may be perfectly true that all men who are secularists are not atheists, I put that in my opinion, the logical consequence of the acceptance of secularism must be that the man gets to atheism if he has brains enough to comprehend. So what is he saying? He said, look, right now in his time, there are some people who consider themselves secularists and they say they believe in God. But he's saying, really, if you really understand what secularism teaches, you can only come to one conclusion, right? He says, in his opinion, the logical consequence, meaning you must accept, if you accept secularism, that man gets to atheism if he has brains enough to comprehend. So really, he's mocking these people who say, yeah, I'm secular, but I'm Christian, or I'm secular, but I'm Muslim. And what are you talking about? You cannot be secular and believe in God, right? If you really understand what we're teaching here. So he says, you cannot have a scheme of morality without atheism. Imagine that. You cannot have a moral system. You cannot have a moral system of rights and wrongs. What the sheikh before me was speaking about, halal and haram. You cannot have that unless you disbelieve in God. Really, for us, it's the exact opposite. You can't have that. We can't go around making up our own system of halal and haram. And what the sheikh mentioned, for the different issues that we've had in Muslim history, that wasn't really one of them. Right? There weren't people going around making books like what these guys are talking about. No. So he says, you cannot have a scheme of morality without atheism. The utilitarian scheme, and don't worry about that big word, I'm going to define it in a second, is a defiance of the doctrine of providence and a protest against God. They're protesting against God. That's what secularism is, right? And we say the exact opposite. You atheists, you cannot have objective morality. You cannot have an objective moral system without the Creator, without His commands, which He gives us into us with Scripture, Quran and Sunnah. You can't have that. You can't go around. And that's why all these atheists, I mean, you guys can think about it. There's some younger people here, so I don't want to be obscene, but some of these atheists believe in ridiculous things, you know? And you just think about it. But what they believe is morally acceptable and not, I mean, you will be shocked if you hear some of the way they talk, you know? So anyway, he says that utilitarianism is the liberalist moral system. So what is that? That's another big word we have to try to break down. I mean, if you guys at least benefit from this talk, I hope that you'll learn what secularism is or what liberalism is and what some of these principles are, because I know the terminology is a bit difficult, but he said, John Stuart Mill, who I mentioned before, he defines it. So we're going by their definitions, not us. And the guy just told us, hey, look, if you're a secularist and you have a brain, you got to be an atheist, right? So he's actually mocking any of these people who say, I'm a secular Christian or whatever. John Stuart Mill defines utilitarianism as the creed which accepts as the foundation of morals, utility as the greatest happiness principle, holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and are wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. By unhappiness, pain and the privation of pleasure. So he's telling you right there, if you heard of hedonism, it's a very hedonistic understanding. In what is good or what is right is that which gives you happiness. What is wrong is that which makes you unhappy. Now, is that what Islam teaches? No, of course not, right? Of course there are certain things. It's not like I'm saying that we Muslims are miserable. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. But Islam is not simply about, what makes you happy, that's what's right, right? There are plenty of things that we do that we know is our obligation. Doesn't mean we're, like waking up every day so excited about it, although we should try to be. But there are certain things that we have to do in this life, right, as obligations in Islam. And it's not just all about happiness, pain, and pleasure. You see why these are the same type of people that are happy with all this AI and crazy technology that's coming out pretty soon. They don't care. They'll just be happy to sit in one of these pods. I don't know if you've seen them online, where they're just getting this pleasurable stimuli on their brains all day long. They don't see or talk to any real people. They don't care. Why? Because it's coming right out of this. What is good? Pleasure. What is bad? Something that doesn't bring them pleasure. See? So this is why this is so dangerous. And this is not me saying it. This is their own, how can you say, forefathers of their false ideology and, frankly, false religion. Now, there's a book that in the beginning of the book mentions 9 demands of liberalism. So imagine this. This is what they are demanding. It's not, and I'm going to get to sort of the paradox of liberalism. And if you guys don't know about it, you'll see it in just a second. But there are 9 demands that the liberal system came up with back in the 1800s, right? And a lot of them are mentioning the church, because you got to remember at this time in Europe and in the US, obviously the dominant religion was the Christian church, either Catholics or the Church of England Protestants. But as I said, in reality, they hate all religion. So you can replace church with mosque, and that's what they believe. So what's the first demand? Imagine this, demanding this. As Muslims, imagine we demanded these things to Allah. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So they say, we demand that churches or mosques and other ecclesiastical property shall be no longer exempt from taxation. Right? So there are certain tax benefits that they got at the time, and you can still get up until today with churches or mosques or religious organizations. They want this completely disbanded. They don't want any exemption from taxes based on religious affiliation or church or mosque or anything. Number two, second demand. We demand that the employment of chaplains, which are basically like a religious figure, in Congress and in the legislators, in the Navy and militia, and in prisons, asylums, and all other institutions supported by the public money shall be discontinued. Basically, they're saying they don't want any tax money going towards helping out the church or, and as I said, anything to do with religion. Number three, we demand that all public appropriations for educational and charitable institutions of a sectarian character shall cease. Again, the same deal. They don't want any funding, right? Any state funding for education or charity organizations. Nothing like that, if it's religiously related. Number four, we demand that all religious services now sustained by the government shall be abolished. So imagine that there's a connection between the government or the ruling authority, right? And the Sheikh mentioned that for us it's the Khilafah. Imagine that's not connected really to the social welfare or the social life of society. That's what they want. You've heard of this idea of separation between church and state. It's the same thing. They want separation between mosque and state, right? So they don't want any religious services by the government. And especially that the use of the Bible in the public schools, whether ostensibly as a textbook or avowedly as a book of religious worship, shall be prohibited. They want the Bible prohibited in schools. But as I said, don't worry about too much about it because they don't. You think they want the Quran in schools? No, they don't. They want it prohibited. They want to put other books in there. And we know what's in the books that they want to teach our kids. They don't want to put the Quran in there. So that's the fourth one. Number five, we demand that the appointment by the President of the United States or by the governors of the various states of all the religious festivals and fasts shall wholly cease. Yeah, I got one here. Yeah. So that's number five. Don't worry, we're almost through. And this is in 1873 by Francis Ellingwood Abbott. Now, why am I wasting, time going through all of these demands? As I said, if we want to defeat these ideologies, we have to know what they teach and where they come from. If we don't know, it's like shooting in the dark, right? So, number six, we demand that the judicial oath in the courts and in all other departments of the government shall be abolished, and that a simple affirmation under the pains and penalties of perjury shall be established in its stead. You know how, and you guys may have seen I don't know if you've been to court or you've seen it in court, in movie or TV show or whatever. They swear on the Bible that they're going to tell the truth, right? That kind of stuff. Or some people have done it with the Quran. They don't want that because they're like, this religious stuff, get out of here. What are you talking about? We just want you to swear that you're going to tell the truth, and if you don't, you're going to be held legally accountable for it. So that's the sixth demand. Number seven, we demand that all laws directly or indirectly enforcing the observance of Sunday as the Sabbath shall be repealed. So the Sabbath originally was for the Jews on Saturday. The Christians moved it to Sunday. It's, the church day on Sunday. So they don't want that anymore. They want to abolish that. Number eight, we demand that all laws looking to the enforcement of Christian morality shall be abrogated, and that all laws shall be conformed to the requirements of natural morality. Well, what is natural morality? Equal rights and impartial liberty. And we'll see what really the paradox of liberalism is in a second. And number nine, the last one, we demand that not only in the Constitution of the United States and of the several states, but also in the practical administration of the same, no privilege or advantage shall be conceded to Christianity or any other special religion that our entire political system shall be founded and administered on a purely secular basis, and whatever changes shall prove necessary to this end shall be consistently, unflinchingly, and promptly made. So the guy was pretty serious. He's like, there's no question about it. Anything that seems to favor Christianity or any other religion, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, they don't care. They all view it the same, right? So those are the 9 demands of liberalism, right? Do those sound like the 9 or like the 10 commandments? No, I mean, there's nothing like that. The 9 laws in Islam? No, nothing like that. So what is the modern secular liberal project? I tried to go through briefly some definitions and what these terms mean. What's secularism? What's liberalism? How are these things defined? What are their principles? What are their demands? Right? What about today? So that's okay. We went in a little history. What about today? Modern secular liberal project. The paradox of modern liberalism. What's this paradox? Well, they have an extreme emphasis on consent, meaning, okay, if you have my approval, I say yes, it's okay, no problem, do whatever you want. And individual freedom, while at the same time, they seek to convert everyone to their philosophy. They don't just say, oh, well, this is what I believe, and since it's all about individual freedom, then why as a Muslim are you trying to stop me from doing what I want to do? Right? That's the paradox. When I say paradox, really contradiction in that they say it's all about freedom and consent until it crosses their so-called moral principles, right? Until a Muslim says, well, this is how I want to behave, or this is how I want to do something. If it disagrees with them, now all of a sudden they want to impinge on your freedom, on your liberty. Well, I thought it was for everybody. No, it's not. Right? So they have an extreme emphasis on consent and individual freedom until it contradicts what they want you to believe. At the same time, their tactic, and this is why it's so dangerous, is to brainwash and influence society to follow this satanic, yes, this is from the shaitan, completely. There's no question about it. Why? Because the guy told you, if you are a secularist, unless you're stupid, you have to be an atheist. This is from the shaitan. So their tactic is to brainwash and influence society to follow this satanic ideology. It's not just for the guy and his friends to believe in it, they have a little liberal club and, stuff like that. No, they want to influence society. And unfortunately, and it really pains me to say this, they have been somewhat successful. Look at the West. Look at why the West is falling apart. People don't know even who a man and a woman are anymore, right? Because of this chaos that's going on. And they're trying to put this in our kids' education. They're trying to drive this down your throats. So how do they do this? I mentioned childhood education. They do this through childhood education, media propaganda. And this isn't just my claim. They have books where they admit this, what their strategy is. And you would be shocked. Some people, if you didn't have enough faith in Islam, you would think, wow, you go read what they were saying, what their plan was back in like the 60s and 70s, and you see where they're at now, you're like, wow, this guy looks like he knew what was going to happen. But of course, we know that's not true. But it's so scary that the plan that they set in place, they somehow managed for it to become true to the point where Muslim majority countries are so influenced by these secular liberal ideologies and powers. Right? And that's one of the biggest problems in the Muslim world right now. Because the rulers are not governing by Islam, what the previous sheikh was talking about. Right? They're governing by these liberal, secular values, and there are many different reasons and situations why, but there are a few main ones. It's not too hard to figure out. But anyway, they do this through, they try to influence society, they're not only concerned with the non-Muslims, they're concerned with the Muslims. I don't want to scare people, but they want your kids. They even have songs about this. I mean, it's crazy if you really go down the rabbit hole with some of this stuff. But they do this through childhood education, media propaganda, lobbyists, political policies, war, and yes, bribing foreign Muslim nations, promising them things like wealth and trade deals and all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, they've been somewhat successful. That's why we have to stand up to this. But if we don't know what these people believe and why they're doing it, we can't do anything about it, can we? So what does Islam teach? Why is it so opposed to this? Well, of course, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe in the Creator. We believe that in, what is Islam? Submission to the Creator. Our will to be in conformity with His. We don't make our own desire a God besides Allah. Astaghfirullah. Right? Of course, fundamentally. And also, notice that they're focused on the dunya. And there's nothing bad in Islam about being successful in the dunya. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to be poor and go and live in a mountain and with raggedy clothes. That's not what I'm saying. But they are only focused on the dunya. So everything that they do is not for any goals or any success in the next life, which in Islam, that's more important than this life. Not even close. Success for us is not just mere material gains in this life. There's an afterlife which is far superior to this life. We all know this. This is the promise of the Quran, right? And what? We will be judged by an all-knowing, just Creator that is going to reward and punish us based on our intentions, our beliefs, what we do, our actions. So we're accountable to a higher authority than ourselves. It's not just us we have to worry about, right? No separation between mosque and state. And this is not controversial here, I don't think, otherwise I probably wouldn't have been invited, but it is controversial in some Muslim circles. So-called Muslim circles, I say. In Islam, there is no separation between mosque and state, or what they call state. Anybody that told you that is lying. And I'm sure other people before me have talked about it. The previous sheikh was mentioning some of that. There's no separation. They say, oh, yeah, America's separation between church and state. Yeah, because that comes from all this liberal stuff. There's no separation between the mosque, meaning Islam is one whole thing. You can't take a part of it over here and then, neglect another. It doesn't work like that. It's a whole package. You might not like it. You either take it or you don't. But you have to take the whole thing. So Allah is our ultimate authority, man is not. Islam is submission to Allah, our Creator, not our own whims and desires. Our morals, our rules, our regulations, where do they come from? The Quran and Sunnah. Not from John Stuart Mill and John, your neighbor from down the street. We don't care about what he said, with all due respect. So how should Muslims combat secularism? And I wish I had more time to speak about this and actually more research and time on my own free time to really put some of these things into place. I apologize that I'm giving you like this doomy picture and not much on the back end. But just quickly, once we know what their principles are and how they're opposed to Islam and how they're trying to affect us and our children, of course, we have to do the opposite. So how should Muslims combat secularism? We should replace their systems with Islam and Islamic teachings.
Here! Allah! Here! Allah!
Muslim nations should unify under the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not under John Stuart Mill and all these other people I'm mentioning. Right? How do we achieve this? Obviously, it's very difficult. We could talk about it. I mean, there's a lot more time that needs to be spent on some of these things. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm not saying it's easy. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to at least be thinking about it and then try to put some things into action. But here are some ideas. And of course, we're doing this. Islamic Oasis is an example. What did they do? They bought a church, and now it's a Muslim community here. Look at all these people. They invited me. I mean, I don't know why. I'm not that smart, but hopefully you learned something, right? So and this I think is the first event, if I'm correct, in Islamic Oasis, right? This is the first event here. So this is the beginning, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah into it. This is the first of much more to come. But this is an example of what I mean, what we have to do. We have to have these types of events to educate our community about the dangers. Because look, we're in America, but we have to know the dangers of the society. And I'm not saying, look, don't go out of your house or anything like that, but we have to understand what we're dealing with. So we have to create our own educational systems based on Islam that is independent of the secular West. We don't want to depend on them. We don't want them giving us laws and rules and regulations that we have to follow, telling us what we can't teach our kids and what we can't. We don't want that. We have to create our own media outlets to educate Muslims and non-Muslims, because of course our dawah is to non-Muslims too, about the truth of Islam. What does Islam teach? Why do we have obligations to Allah? What are His rights over us? Right? We have to be able to do this through education, through school programs, right? And I know Islamic Oasis is involved in that. And create our own media outlets. Fox News, BBC, CNN, all these programs. Who are they controlled by? Are they controlled by Muslims? No. Why don't we have our own programs where we are putting out the truth of Islam and projecting, right, the correct understanding of politics, current events through a Muslim perspective? That's what we need. Because they are doing it from their satanic perspective, right? And it's very strong. Unfortunately, you repeat something over and over and over again, and people keep watching the same thing, you get affected by it. That's why, really, Muslims shouldn't be watching a lot of that stuff, right? And one thing that, Muslims still have today are numbers, and we're growing. And these people don't like it. The secularists, the liberalists, they're scared of us. They don't like that we're growing. They don't like seeing me up here, right? A white ex-Catholic. What is this guy doing here? What's he doing over here in Islamic Oasis? And I'm nobody, but they're scared of me. I know they are. They're scared of all of you too. Because they don't like Muslims. This is the reality, right? These secular liberalists, they don't like Muslims. It's not just us. They don't like Christians. They're scared of us. Because if they know, and this is one thing, and that's why Christianity, unfortunately, is a weak religion, but for Muslims, we have a very strong faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our authority, right? And we're not budging on that. But we have so many Muslims and we're growing in numbers, so we have to use those numbers to our advantage, right? Use our numbers and wealth to influence, as I said, through education, through media, through positions of power. If anybody can get into, positions of power and actually do something about it, speak to these rulers. I mean, there's many different ways, but we have to use our numbers and wealth and put them in the right direction. Through education, through media programs, through doing stuff like this, what we're doing here today. Right? And that's the end of the talk. But like I said, I wish I would have had more time, and this is food for thought for maybe future talks where we go into detail on how to accomplish getting some of these things off the ground. But at the very least, I hope that you guys benefited something from it. I know it was a bit technical. What's utilitarianism and secularism and liberalism and all this kind of stuff? But I tried to explain it in the simplest way. And I hope that you got something out of it. And I thank you all for being very attentive. I know it's been a long day. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I said, put barakah into Islamic Oasis and everybody that was involved in putting this event together and the brothers that picked me up, everything. May Allah bless you for all your efforts. And I look forward to any questions that you guys have, inshallah.
Takbir. Takbir.
So the first question is anonymous, but it got the most likes, so let's see what it is. Will secularism itself become so extreme that it will tip over and collapse, or will it require an external force to challenge it? An example is the Khilafah. I think we're already seeing the collapse. I mean, the sheikh before me, the speaker before me, he mentioned, I mean, look at what's going on in the Western society now. Even forget about the Muslims having, our position here, but look at how the non-Muslims are dealing with each other. They say America's never been so divided. I mean, they can't even agree on what is a man and a woman, right? So, of course, I mean, I think we're already seeing secularism, and we're seeing the so-called fruits of secularism and liberalism. Now, of course, they're not good fruits, but we're seeing the result of secularism and liberalism right now. What is it? This LGBTQ agenda stuff, right? They're teaching it in the schools. Even a lot of these Americans don't like it. So there's this big division going on in the country and in the West in general. So I would say we're already seeing, it is becoming so extreme that even, you have the left and the right in the US, even many people on the left are like, what is this woke stuff that they're talking about, right? They don't like it. So it's becoming so extreme that they're just going to eat each other alive. That's the reality. That's what we're seeing now. But does that mean that the Muslims don't have a role to play? Of course we do. Of course we should have a goal to unify under a khilafah, even though some people tell you, oh no, we shouldn't. We don't want to do that. That's like, 100 years ago, forget about it. It's over. No. So I think it's twofold. I think we're already seeing the beginnings of it, and that's a good thing. But Muslims should be ready and should actually help the process of replacing it with the correct system. Okay, so the next one. Yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't see him sitting there. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What will they gain from what? So the people who are part of I just want to make sure I understand the question. So the people who are part of LGBTQ community, what did they get in supporting it? Is that what you're saying?
The system, what is the system that the secular liberals gain from supporting this agenda?
Okay. So the secular liberal system, why are they supporting LGBTQ? And this is the paradox, right? You have this whole thing, love is love, right? They made gay marriage, so-called gay marriage. You could be gay and get married in the US. All of these things, love is love. Why? Because, again, if you understand their principle, It's about what? Complete freedom to do whatever you want. But then here's the crazy part about this. And, you know, I think it's all men here, so I'm more safe, I guess. Okay. Right. So we know in this country, right? Can you get married to multiple women? Polygamy? It's not easy. Maybe, I don't know if you guys know, but it's not easy. I know people, even you try to not to do it with the government. You go to a sheikh, I'm sorry, I can't do it because they're cracking down on me. They're coming in the mosque. I mean, I've heard all kinds of stories. So the crazy thing is, if love is love, and 2 men can get married, 2 women can get married, right? Why is it that they don't allow a Muslim man to get married to 4 women? I thought love was love, right? It's consent. All that matters is consent. Well, as long as the 1 man and the 4 women consent, what's the problem? So this is the hypocrisy. You understand? This is the complete hypocrisy. LGBTQ stuff, all of it comes out of that principle of as long as there's consent, as long as the people are happy who are involved, there's no problem. But then when it comes from a religious aspect, the Muslim a man wants to get married to more than 1 wife. Well, I thought love is love. As long as they consent and they agree, what's the problem? So they're all a bunch of hypocrites, but the reality is it's a satanic agenda. And fundamentally, as I said, it's not just merely about, and this is proof of it, consent and allowing people to do what they want. It's having a morality that is fundamentally immoral. It's fundamentally saying that, oh yes, 2 women can get married, but a man can't get married to more than 1 woman. So anyway, it's just a bunch of hypocrisy, but there's not another person over here, right? Okay, I'll go to the next one on the computer here. What are some common tendencies of Muslims whose thinking have been impacted? Wait, no, there's actually, is there one more? Yeah. What is it? What are some common tendencies of Muslims whose thinking have been impacted by secularism? Well, I mean, where to start? There's a lot of them. But unfortunately, some Muslims buy into this whole aspect, right? They fundamentally do not understand that our authority is Quran and Sunnah. It's Allah. It's not our whims and desires, not whatever we want to do, right? And they think about the same thing about their non-Muslim neighbors. Oh yeah, and they're even, unfortunately, when they were voting for this whole gay marriage stuff, some Muslims were actually voting for gay marriage. I'm saying, what are you guys doing? Right? Because they've been affected to the point of, well, as long as they're not bothering us, let them do whatever they want. That's not an Islamic concept, because whatever you do affects everybody else. Islam is not only about the individual. It's how the individual affects his family, how he affects his neighborhood, how he affects his community, right? Look at me. I'm all the way from the East Coast. I'm from New Jersey. I'm over here. I feel like I'm part of the community here, right? I'm talking to you guys. So even one guy from New Jersey, I had an effect, whether good or bad. Hopefully it was better, more good than bad, but all the way over here in Chicago. So that's what Islam teaches: community, how we all affect each other, striving in goodness with one another. They don't care about that. They just want to say, oh yeah, Johnny, he has this thing, he likes men, so let him get married, no problem. And some Muslims, unfortunately, they have thought this way, and even to the point where they say, Well, let them do whatever they want, and we can even support them in allowing them to do whatever they want so they don't bother us. But is that happening? Is that happening? Did they pass the law yet to allow Muslim men to get married to more than one woman? Did they allow that yet? I mean, it's just still complications. I know there's 50 states, and I don't know all the laws, but I know that they're still not open to it as they are with two men getting married. So what we have to understand and what Muslims have to get in our head, and I'm not saying that, you don't smile at your neighbor or, I'm not saying stuff like that, but we have to understand that fundamentally, don't think that just because you support them in their agenda, which you shouldn't anyway if it's anti-Islamic, but don't think that if you do, that you pat them on the back and they're going to pat you on the back. No, they're not. They're going to say, look at this guy, he's a chauvinist pig. He wants to just be with all these women. Well, I thought love was love. And I'm just using this as an example, but it's a really good example, especially in the US, to show their hypocrisy. But I think that one of the biggest things Muslims have been affected with, especially in the West and the US, is that they think that if we soften up to them and support them in their haram, in the haram that they're doing, well, they're going to make things lawful for us. Not the case. Let's see, we got a few more questions here. Okay. Unfortunately, more and more scholars are compromising on Islam and taking ideas from secularism to remain trendy or popular. That's what What is your message or advice to them? Well, I mean, if you have enough sense to identify who those people are, forget about some of them, because we can give advice. I can give advice to them, but who am I? They're not going to listen to me. My concern is more of the advice to the person asking the question and the people here. What should you guys do about it? Well, the first thing you should do is, if you see people like that on YouTube or TikTok or whatever you're watching nowadays, stop watching them. Don't watch their stuff, right? Not every guy that has a thobe and a beard is somebody that you should be taking knowledge from, right? So if you identify and speak to people, don't listen to my advice, but it's obviously you got to judge it on an individual basis. Speak to people you trust, right, that are more knowledgeable than you, and say, look, this guy seems a bit funny. Listen to what he's saying over here. Oh yeah, don't listen to him. Plain and simple, we should not be listening and supporting these people, donating to them, going to their talks, watching their videos, sharing their videos. Stop watching that stuff. That's a big problem, because one of the things is, and a lot of this is about money and fame and views and all this kind of stuff. If they weren't getting views and having their own, obviously not success in terms of an Islamic perspective, but what they're viewing as success, they wouldn't be able to keep doing what they're doing if they were getting 10 views on YouTube, right? So I'm not blaming the people here, because I don't even know most of you guys, but what I'm saying is we have to look at ourselves. Why are these so-called imams so popular? Why are they getting so many views? But they're not coming to Islamic Oasis or wherever else. Why is that? It's a problem with us. It's a problem with the Muslim community. For whatever reason, they want to watch these people, because we're not educating our youth enough to tell them this is not Islam. This is not, you shouldn't be watching this guy, to the point where if you put that person on, you say, no, this guy's off. There's something wrong with him, right? So we have to start with ourselves and educating the Muslim youth better, so that when they come across these people and these videos, they know this is not what they should be getting into, right? But for the imams and, so-called shuyukh themselves that are doing this stuff and compromising and going to LGBTQ rallies and whatever else they're doing, right? Come back to Islam, right? Stop doing this kind of stuff. That's my advice to them. But Unfortunately, some of them have sold their souls. They don't really care. They're doing this for money, for fame, for whatever, political power gain, all this kind of things. So I'm more concerned about you guys and the Muslim youth. We just have to educate them to know that when they watch these things, this is not what they should be listening to. But to hope that helps. Oh, we got a brother here. Yeah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
First, I just want to thank you for how you make all the teachings that you do. We follow you, watch you every day. I didn't watch you talk TV day.
If you watch me every day, bro, I feel bad for you.
My question is, a lot of things have changed. There's a lot of interfaith, a lot of other religions feel like the way gatherings are not exactly. What's your opinion on secular Muslim and secular mosque? How can one approach someone?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a really, it's not an easy answer because it's a difficult situation. Some communities are so different from one another. But of course, as a Muslim, we should be involved with our local mosque where we go. Obviously, people come to Islamic Oasis for a reason, right? As opposed to going other places. And I'm not saying just go to one mosque or one center, but obviously you got to find the right place. I mean, if they're doing things in the mosque that are wrong and you advise them or you know other people that advise them, sometimes you just got to go somewhere else, right? Because you don't want to put your own, and don't think like, oh, well, they're not going to affect me, right? They will affect you. Unfortunately, they will affect you and they will affect your kids. And I'm not saying all mosques are evil. Some people, some of them just don't know any better. Some of them are ignorant. You give them advice and then they'll change around. But if you find that these people are doing things that are, you know, so haram, they're holding gatherings that are haram, they're speaking about things that are haram, they're doing outside activities that are haram. Of course, I think if you have a position in that community, you have an obligation to try to advise the people. You know, usually most mosques have a board. They have board members. Figure out who they are. Speak to these people. Speak to the imam. Speak to the people that have some sway in the mosque and say, you know, I saw this, or they had this event, and you know what? There was a good aspect of it, but we could have done something different. Let me give you an idea and see what they say. And I've had experiences. Some of them will get upset and be like, who the heck are you, dude? Who are you? I see you like once a week on Fridays. I mean, who are you? Some of them don't care. But if they have that reaction and they don't, because it's not about you, if they don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're actually telling them something that they're doing haram in the mosque or with the activities of the mosque, and that happens multiple times, then that's not the place for you. But of course, try to advise them in the best way. And I can't give a one-size-fits-all answer to that because every community is different. Every person's different. Everybody giving the advice is different, right? So it's going to be on a person-to-person basis, and you have to just approach it in the best way. But if it comes to the point where you're not seeing any improvement, you just got to go somewhere else. That's the reality.
One question from the left, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
We'll hear the last question here.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so this is a good question. What needs to be done to bring secular liberalism to its intellectual knees in the public domain here in the U.S., and how can we pique interest in Islamic deen? So, of course, in terms of Muslims, as I said, and some of the stuff I'm saying is repetitive, but it's important. And if you hear it 3 times over, you might get it after the 3rd time. We have to educate Muslims from a young age, teaching them what Islam is. Because once they know what Islam is and what it teaches, when they come into other things, they will view it as strange. They will know that something's wrong, right? So that's important. Then when it comes to from the non-Muslim perspective, of course, we have to give dawah. We're in a secular, liberal, Western society. So I'm not saying just, you can't smile at your non-Muslim neighbor or try to speak to them or try to give them dawah. Yes, you can, right? Anything that you know from Islam, as the Prophet ﷺ said, even if it's one ayah, you can convey it. So dawah is important, especially in-person stuff. Like the brother was just mentioning me, watching me on YouTube. I do stuff on YouTube and social media. But honestly, this is way more beneficial in terms of speaking to people in person, right? Because when the guy's on an anonymous account and, he's got like an egg picture and whatever else, I mean, it's not the same thing. So speaking to non-Muslims in person, trying to convey to them what Islam teaches, what it doesn't, why they should consider it, why it's beneficial, all of this is important. And, we can do this numerous ways, whether it be on social media, whether it be with friends or family or people in your community. And this kind of connects to the previous question. I'm not opposed to so-called interfaith, although that has got a bad name. It's not as if we can't talk to non-Muslims. Yes, we can, but there's an etiquette and way of doing it, right? So it has to be in accordance with Islam. But anyway, brother here. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So the so-called, if you want to call them that, secular shuyukh, we got to stay away from them. So Muslims have to have enough knowledge about Islam to identify these people, warn against them. I mean, of course, try to advise them first, but warn against them if they're obstinate in this foolishness that they're into, and then get away from them. So we can't ally with those people. We can't. I mean, I know some people want to, but we cannot ally with these so-called secular shuyukh. It just doesn't work. So we can advise them. If they don't listen, some people may have, know them or have their ear. If not, warn against them and stay away from these people. But going back to education, and I don't have kids yet, but inshallah I will. A lot of people here have kids, and I don't want to tell you guys what to do with your kids, but this is just my personal advice. I'm very scared about my children, educating my children in this secular society in public schools. So if it were me personally, if I had a kid today and I was living in the U.S., I would try to find an Islamic school in the U.S. That the people there, know that they're actually teaching Islam, they're not going against the religion, and that's where you should put your kids. That's my opinion, but I can't tell you what to do. You know what I mean? If I know that a lot of people can't afford it, or in some places they say, "Oh, well, Brother Jake, it's not there. We don't really have that in the community." So yes, definitely that's a gap that we have to fill. We have to have more Islamic schools to where we can put our children in those public schools and make sure that the right people are running them, that we have the right teachers. It's a big operation, right? We have to have a grassroots project of teaching our youth, having the proper teachers in these school systems, right? The right people in place, and funding the right people. Because the reality is the Muslim community is a big Muslim, and we have a lot of Muslims, and we have a lot of money too. I mean, a lot of people want to tell you we don't, but we do. We just have to put that money to good use, right? We have to donate to the right project. We have to fund the right schools, right? So that we can have more of them for our kids. So, I mean, that's my advice. I'm very scared. I would be scared to put my kids in public school. I know some people will say, "Oh, Jake, I mean, I have my kid in school." I'm not like hating on you or anything like that, but that's just my opinion. So I hope that makes sense. But are we done for the questions, or because there was a couple more, but I don't know if we're done here.
Oh, we're running out of time.